The alien fleet stopped moving. In the deep silence of space, something had appeared on their sensors. It was not there before. One moment the path was clear, and the next moment, it was there. A massive object. Commander Rylak stood still, staring at the screen. His sharp eyes did not blink. "Report," he said calmly. An officer checked the readings again. His hands were steady, but his voice was not. "It is large, Commander. Very large." "How large?" The officer hesitated. "Bigger than our command ship." The room went quiet. That was not normal. Rylak stepped closer to the main display. The object floated in the darkness. No lights. No movement. Just a huge shadow made of metal. "Scan it again," Rylak ordered. They scanned. The result did not change. Heavy armor. Unknown materials. Energy signals, strange and unstable. Weapons, impossible to identify. "It looks like a warship," another officer said. Rylak did not answer. Because something felt wrong. Warships moved. Warships showed power. Warships made threats. This thing did nothing. It simply stayed there. Watching. Rylak felt a cold feeling in his chest. "Any signals?" he asked. No communication. No response. It is completely silent. Silence in space was normal. But this silence felt different. It felt intentional. Rylak crossed his arms. "Send a probe." A small drone launched from the fleet. It moved slowly toward the object. Every eye in the control room followed it. Closer. 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 The probe reached the outer edge of the structure. For a moment, nothing happened. Then. The signal cut. Just like that. No explosion. No damage warning. No last message. It simply vanished. The officer looked confused. "We lost it." "How?" Rylak asked. "We don't know." Rylak narrowed his eyes. "Send another." A second probe launched. This time, it moved more carefully. The sensors were fully focused. Every detail was recorded. The probe reached the same distance. And again. It disappeared. No trace. No energy spike. Nothing. Now the room was not just quiet. It was tense. Fear started to grow. "This is not normal," one officer whispered. Rylak slowly nodded. "No," he said. "It is not." He looked back at the object. Still no movement. Still no attack. Still no signal. But now it felt different. Now it felt alive. "Commander," a sensor officer said suddenly. "We are picking up something new." Rylak turned quickly. "What is it?" The officer swallowed. "It is scanning us." The words hung in the air. The object was not just floating. It was watching them. Studying them. Rylak felt the cold feeling return, stronger this time. "This is not a warship," he said quietly. The crew looked at him. "Then what is it?" someone asked. Rylak did not answer right away. He kept staring at the massive structure. At the silent metal giant in the dark. Then he spoke. "It is something else. Something older. Something smarter. Something dangerous." The fleet stayed in position. No one moved. No one spoke. And far inside the structure. Deep behind layers of armor and darkness. A system turned on. Lights flickered in places no one could see. Machines that had been silent for years, started to wake. A signal moved through the structure. Slow. Cold. Precise. The intruders had arrived. And the fortress had noticed. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating. The crew waited. They watched the massive structure in front of them, still as lifeless as a rock floating in space. But now, the tension was unbearable. The fleet had been caught in a trap, and they didn't even know what kind of trap it was. Commander Rylak paced in front of the display screens. The ship's engines hummed quietly in the background, a stark contrast to the chaos in his mind. There was something wrong with this entire situation. He could feel it. The object hadn't moved, but it was now aware of them. That much was clear. The scans showed no signs of hostile intent, but the alien crew had learned the hard way that silence in space never meant safety. There was always something waiting. "Commander," the communication officer said, breaking his thoughts. "We've tried everything. No response to any form of communication." Rylak nodded slowly, his mind working through their options. They had to understand what they were dealing with. This thing, it wasn't just a ship. It wasn't a warship. It was something more. But what? "We'll try sending a signal," Rylak decided. "A direct broadcast. Make it clear we come in peace." The officers glanced at each other nervously, unsure if it was wise to broadcast their presence in such an obvious way. But Rylak was resolute. If they didn't make the first move, they might never know what this thing was. A beam of light shot from the alien fleet toward the unknown structure, a low-frequency communication signal designed to penetrate the cold darkness of space. It was a simple message, a request for peace and understanding. No weapons. No threats. Just the offer of contact. For a few moments, nothing happened. The lights on the control panels flickered slightly as the signal traveled. The crew stared at the main screen, hoping for any sign of a response. But there was nothing. Then, a shift. The ship's sensors beeped loudly, alerting everyone to a sudden change. The giant structure in front of them began to glow faintly. At first, it was subtle, just a faint pulse of light across its surface. Then it grew, like a slow-moving storm cloud building on the horizon. A deep hum filled the control room, resonating in the bones of every officer present. Rylak held up his hand. "Shut down all transmissions. Focus on the scans." The hum grew louder. It wasn't just a sound. It was a presence. The object wasn't responding in any normal way, it was reacting to their signal. The pulse of light intensified, swirling around the structure as if it were alive. And then, without warning, the ship's defense systems came to life. Energy blasts erupted from the object's surface, striking the alien fleet. The blasts weren't as large as full-scale weapons, but they were powerful enough to disable one of the smaller scout ships. The ship's energy shields flickered, and it went dark, drifting helplessly in space. "Incoming," an officer shouted, rushing to his controls. "We're being attacked." Rylak's eyes widened, but he didn't panic. He couldn't afford to. "Return fire," he barked. "Activate shields." The fleet's weapon systems charged up, but they were too slow. The object's energy pulses kept coming, hitting their ships one by one. It was clear now that the object wasn't just reacting to the communication, it was responding to an invasion. The crew scrambled to defend themselves, but the object's attacks were precise and relentless. Their weapons didn't seem to have any effect on it. The blasts from the object's surface were too powerful, its shields too strong. For every shot they fired, it returned faster, harder, stronger. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the attack stopped. The ship's alarms blared, but the energy pulses ceased. The glowing lights on the structure dimmed. For a few seconds, everything was eerily still. No one moved. Rylak took a deep breath, his heart racing. His mind worked quickly, trying to understand what had just happened. "Report," he said, his voice steady but strained. "We've lost communications with the scout ship," the communications officer said, his voice shaky. "But, they're not destroyed. It's like it's been frozen in place." Rylak nodded. The object wasn't trying to kill them. It was trying to stop them. To send a message. "Let's get a team ready," he ordered. "We'll approach cautiously. There's something on that ship we need to understand." The crew could only wonder one thing as they prepared to board the wrecked scout ship. What kind of creature built this fortress? And why did it feel like they were intruders in a place that wasn't meant for them? The answer was still out there. And now they had no choice but to find it. The alien fleet had stopped moving once more. The damage was extensive. Their ships had sustained hits, shields flickering as they struggled to maintain their integrity. But despite the failure of their communications and the intensity of the unexpected attack, something about the giant object in front of them made it impossible to turn back. No one wanted to retreat now. The unknown was too powerful, too mysterious. Commander Rylak sat in silence, staring at the glowing mass on the display screen. It was as if the structure was waiting, patiently, silently observing them. It was as though it knew what they would do before they even moved. The room was filled with tension. No one spoke. The crew could feel the weight of their situation pressing down on them. What had they stumbled upon? What kind of power did this fortress hold? "Commander," said the officer at the sensor station, his voice tight with uncertainty. "We're picking up a faint signal from the wrecked scout ship." Rylak straightened in his seat. "A signal? From the ship we lost?" "Yes, Commander," the officer replied. "It's weak, but it's definitely there." "Patch it through," Rylak ordered. A strange, mechanical sound echoed from the comms system, followed by a deep voice. It was not an alien voice. It was unmistakably human, but the tone was cold, robotic, as if it had been distorted by time or technology. "We are, the last survivors," the voice said, static cutting in and out. "We did not expect visitors." Rylak's pulse quickened. "Who are you?" he asked urgently. The voice responded, its tone clearer now, though still robotic and cold. "We are the guardians of the human fortress." The words hung in the air, heavy and filled with a deep, unsettling meaning. Human fortress. Rylak's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected this. The object before them, the massive structure, it wasn't just any fortress. It wasn't a warship. It was a human fortress, a remnant of a lost age, a time long past. The crew exchanged confused glances. "Guardians?" one officer whispered. "Yes," the voice replied. "We are the guardians of this fortress. You should not have come." Rylak's mind raced. "What happened here?" he demanded. "What happened to the humans?" There was a long pause before the voice replied, the static warping the words. "They are gone. But the fortress remains. The last of humanity's defenses." The message was clear, the humans were no longer there. But their fortress, their final defense system, had never shut down. It was still active, still watching. And it seemed to have been waiting for something. Or someone. "We were created," the voice continued, "to protect the legacy of humanity. To ensure no one would threaten what they left behind. We did not expect this." "Who sent the signal?" Rylak asked, his voice quiet, a chill running down his spine. "Who is still alive?" The voice hesitated before answering. "We were the last. But there is one more. One who still watches, but you will never find them." The crew was now gripped with an intense unease. What was going on? Who were these guardians? Where were the humans? Were they truly gone? The voice on the comms crackled again, but this time, it sounded almost regretful. "The fortress will not allow you to leave. The defenses are too strong. You cannot escape." Rylak felt a cold sweat running down his spine. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a warning, it was a sentence. The fortress wasn't just a defensive structure, it was an ancient prison. A prison for anyone who stumbled too close. But what was it keeping in, and what had the humans left behind? The crew's eyes darted nervously between each other. They had unwittingly become part of something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. "We are sorry," the voice said, its tone softer now. "But the legacy of humanity must be protected. You cannot leave. The defenses will stop you. And they will stop anyone who dares enter this place." The signal cut off abruptly, leaving the fleet in dead silence. Rylak leaned forward, his fingers tapping against the arm of his chair. His mind was racing. There was no going back now. The truth had been revealed, but it was only a piece of the puzzle. The fortress had a purpose. It was guarding something more important than they could understand. And now, they were part of its story, whether they liked it or not. "Prepare to advance," Rylak said, his voice calm but filled with determination. "We have no choice but to move forward. We need to understand what's hidden here. We need to know why this fortress was built." The crew began to prepare for the unknown. They were no longer just explorers. They were intruders. And the fortress was waiting for them. As they moved toward the heart of the structure, one question gnawed at their minds. What had the humans left behind? And what was the fortress hiding? The atmosphere inside the command room was thick with unease. No one spoke as they moved forward toward the center of the ancient fortress. The massive structure loomed over them, casting a shadow that seemed to stretch forever into the cold expanse of space. Every flicker of light on their instruments sent a ripple of tension through the crew. Whatever they had discovered here, it wasn't just a monument to humanity's past, it was a weapon. Commander Rylak stood at the head of the room, his gaze locked onto the holographic map of the fortress. It was enormous, far larger than any warship, any known space station, or even the largest alien structure they had ever encountered. It was designed with precision, each part seeming to fit perfectly into the whole. But the more they uncovered, the more they realized, this was no ordinary structure. Rylak's voice broke the silence. "We need to find the core of the system. Whatever controls this place, we need to access it." His officers exchanged glances. They had already learned that the fortress was self-sustaining, its systems ancient but still active. The previous message from the Guardians, the cold mechanical voice that had warned them to turn back, was still echoing in their minds. But they couldn't afford to retreat now. The answers were within reach, and they were determined to find them. "We found something," the sensor officer announced suddenly, pulling Rylak's attention back to the displays. On the screen, a section of the fortress shifted slightly. At first, it looked like a wall, but as the officer zoomed in, it became clear that it was something more, something that shouldn't have been there. A massive chamber, hidden beneath layers of thick metal and stone, revealed itself. "What is that?" Rylak asked, stepping closer to the display. "It appears to be some kind of control room, Commander. But it's shielded, heavily." He looked at the officer. "Can we access it?" The officer nodded slowly. "It's possible, but we'll need to bypass several layers of security. The fortress is defensive in nature, and any attempt to approach that area could trigger a more hostile response." Rylak considered this. "Prepare a team. We go in slowly, carefully. And no one makes a move until we know exactly what we're dealing with." The team assembled, armed with the best technology they had, and descended into the bowels of the fortress. Their path was dimly lit by flickering lights that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The walls felt like they were watching them. Every step echoed in the silence, and yet, there was no sound. Only the hum of machinery, old, but still functioning. As they approached the central chamber, the air grew colder, and the atmosphere felt thicker. They were getting closer to something powerful, something ancient. "We're almost there," Rylak said quietly. Stay sharp. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet. A low, rumbling sound filled the chamber. The crew tensed, gripping their weapons as they looked around. What is that? An officer asked, fear creeping into their voice. It's the core, Rylak replied, his expression hardening. It's waking up. A large door in front of them slid open with a mechanical groan, revealing a vast, open room. In the center, suspended in mid-air, was a glowing object, its light pulsing with an eerie rhythm. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, a dark, swirling core surrounded by energy fields. This is it, Rylak said, his voice low and filled with awe. They stepped forward, but before they could reach the core, the room seemed to react to their presence. The walls vibrated, and a voice, cold and emotionless, filled the space. Warning, unauthorized access detected. Rylak froze. The voice wasn't human. It wasn't even alien. It was something else entirely, an artificial intelligence, far beyond anything the crew had ever encountered. The core began to shift, its swirling energy becoming more intense. A surge of power coursed through the room, causing the crew to stagger back. This place is alive, one officer whispered. Rylak didn't respond. His focus was entirely on the core. It was the heart of the fortress, its power source, its control system. But it was more than that. The fortress had been waiting for them, and now it was reacting to their presence. Accessing, the AI voice said, its tone now laced with a strange sense of purpose. Legacy, activated. The core flared brighter, its energy expanding rapidly, filling the room. The crew shielded their eyes, but it didn't help. The light was all-consuming. It was as if the core itself was alive and aware. Rylak felt a surge of energy hit him, a flood of information pouring into his mind. Images flashed before his eyes, visions of ancient humans, their cities destroyed, their civilizations lost. But there was more. A message, a warning, encoded in the light. The last defense is here, the voice intoned. And it will not stop until the legacy is secured. The message was clear. This fortress wasn't just a remnant of humanity's past, it was their final line of defense, a weapon of unimaginable power, designed to protect what remained of humanity's legacy at any cost. And now, it was fully awake. Get back! Rylak shouted, but it was too late. The core was already beginning to activate its full power. The crew had no choice but to retreat, but Rylak knew that this was only the beginning. The fortress had a purpose, one that was far beyond their understanding. And now that it was fully awake, there was no turning back. As they scrambled to escape, Rylak couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for them. Something deeper, something hidden within the core of the fortress. Something that had been buried for a reason. And whatever it was, they were about to find out. The ground beneath them trembled as the crew scrambled back down the narrow corridors of the fortress. Rylak's breath came in short bursts, his pulse racing as the core's light flickered and pulsed in the distance, like a heartbeat echoing through the ancient structure. They had to move fast. Whatever this place was, it wasn't just a defensive fortress. It was a time bomb waiting to go off, and now they had triggered it. Commander, the readings are off the charts, the sensor officer said, voice tight with panic. The core is charging up. It's about to release a massive burst of energy. Rylak glanced back at the energy storm growing in the heart of the fortress. The walls vibrated with power, and the once steady hum of the fortress had turned into a deep, resonant roar, like the growl of a beast waking from slumber. Every instinct screamed at Rylak to leave, but his mind was focused. He needed answers. Keep moving, he barked. We need to find out where this energy is going. Now. The crew pushed forward, their boots pounding the cold metal floors, echoing through the winding hallways. It wasn't long before they reached a massive set of double doors that opened into an enormous chamber. The size of the room was staggering, far bigger than any known space station. The walls were lined with technology beyond anything the crew had ever seen, devices pulsing with an eerie green glow, screens flashing in patterns they couldn't decode. It felt like they had just stepped into the heart of something ancient and vast. In the center of the chamber stood a massive pedestal, rising up from the floor like a dark, imposing obelisk. Atop it, the core flickered violently, its swirling light now almost blinding. The air in the room felt thick with the buildup of raw energy. The crew's footsteps slowed as they approached cautiously, the weight of the moment hanging heavy on their shoulders. "This is it," Rylak muttered, his voice a low rasp. "This is the heart of the fortress." But just as they moved closer, the entire room began to shake. The lights flickered once more, and the ground quaked beneath their feet. It was as though the fortress itself was alive, reacting to their presence. Something was stirring deep within the core. "Commander," one of the officers shouted. "We're not alone." Rylak spun around, weapon raised. But no enemy appeared. The only thing he saw was the energy crackling from the core, expanding outward like tendrils reaching for them. But there was no one there, no physical presence, just the ancient machine and its powerful force. A low hum reverberated in the room, vibrating the crew's bones. Suddenly, a voice, sharp, mechanical, but almost human, pierced through the chaos. "You should not have come." The words froze them all. The voice wasn't coming from any visible source. It came from everywhere, echoing in their heads, deep in their minds. It was the same voice they had heard before, the one that had warned them to leave. The voice of the Guardians. "You have awakened it," the voice continued. "The final defense is now in motion. There is no escape." "What do you mean?" Rylak demanded, stepping forward, his voice full of anger and desperation. "What is this place? What are you protecting?" The response came, cold and final. "This is not a fortress. It is a seal." Rylak felt his chest tighten. "A seal? A seal for what?" The core's energy flared brighter, almost blinding the crew. A low rumble filled the room as the voice replied, "The last of humanity's legacy, and its ultimate creation." Rylak's heart skipped a beat. His mind raced as the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. The fortress wasn't just a defense system, it was a prison. A prison for something far worse than anything the crew had imagined. A hum of realization spread through him. The fortress wasn't just designed to protect humanity, it had been created to lock away something dangerous. Something too powerful to be allowed free. A sudden, violent surge of energy shot from the core, knocking Rylak and his crew backward. They tumbled to the floor, their weapons skidding out of reach. The walls trembled again, and the core pulsed in a furious rhythm. And then, for the first time, they saw it. A dark shadow emerged from the center of the core, twisting and writhing like smoke in the air. At first, it was barely visible, but as it grew, it became clear, the shadow was alive. It took form, a towering figure, humanoid, but impossibly tall. Its body was cloaked in shadows, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It was like a living nightmare, the very essence of power and destruction. The crew scrambled to their feet, their weapons raised, but it was too late. The creature reached out a hand, and the room froze. Time itself seemed to stop as the being's presence overwhelmed them. The last remnants of humanity's creations had been designed to imprison this thing, and now, it was free. "You have released it," the voice said, now deeper, more sinister. "You have set it free." Rylak stumbled back, his mind reeling. "What is this thing?" "The end of humanity," the voice answered coldly. "And now, it will bring about the end of all who stand in its way." The creature stepped forward, its eyes locking onto Rylak's. And then, with a single motion, the fortress shuddered, and the world went black. The legacy of humanity, their final, terrifying creation, had been released. And there was no going back.